At Lowe's, this Veterans Day and every day, verified military members, veterans, and their spouses get automatic silver status in My Lowe's Rewards with free standard shipping, plus 10% off eligible purchases with no annual limit. It's one way we honor and give back to those who have served and still do. Learn more now at lowes.com/military. 10% discount can't be combined with another offer. Exclusions, terms, and conditions apply. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
As I imagine is the case for most other hobbies, homebrewing was built on centuries of tradition, from beer styles that were invented on Belgian farms to methods developed for very specific purposes. These days, though, brewers have access to information and quality ingredients that would have been unimaginable to the brewers upon whose shoulders we currently stand. And as such, some have allowed themselves to, well, more or less stray from convention a bit. This is the Brülosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and on this Brews Views episode, we're going to be sharing some of what we're referring to as homebrew hot takes.
I consider myself a bit of a contrarian. You know, I for whatever reason, I have a lot of hot takes, and beer and brewing is no exception. And so I'm excited to get into some of these with you and what our Patreons thought.
Yeah, despite the millions of times I've explicitly said that our only intention is to provide interesting data that some brewers might find helpful, or perhaps even just entertaining, it's become rather apparent to me that many view us as purposely aiming to buck tradition. This used to drive me nuts because it's just wrong. But at this point, I've become so used to hearing that that I'm not sure I really care as much as I used to. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to going over some patron hot takes that we got from our patrons and sharing our opinions on them as well. Now, just a quick reminder, this is a Brews Views episode where we allow ourselves to let loose a bit more than usual. So we might use language some people don't like or share opinions you might disagree with. That's sort of the point of this series. So if you're not into that, well, consider yourself warned. If you enjoy the show and want to help us to continue producing it, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy, which you can do over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, not only are you helping to keep us around, but you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to either a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor or a Q&A with somebody in the brewing world. This month, the awesome John Palmer will be hanging out and answering patron questions. If that name is unfamiliar to you, John is one of the most well-known and highly regarded dudes in the homebrewing world, known for writing How to Brew, co-hosting the Brew Strong podcast, and being an all-around good guy. John's session's going to be on Saturday, November 22nd, so be sure to make your pledge before then. If you want to attend, you can learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Huge props to all of our current patrons for their support, as well as for submitting their hot takes for us to go over in this episode, which is just another perk of being a patron. We offer stuff like that for them to include their opinions on our podcast as well. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brülosophy.com when you're shopping online. Your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral that helps us to cover the costs of running all of this stuff. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving us a rating and a review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, that would be awesome as well. Now, real quick, it has come to our attention that newer episodes of this show are not appearing in Apple Podcasts, which is very frustrating. I'm not entirely sure what's going on. We've reached out to both our podcast host as well as Apple, and while I'm not confident the problem has been resolved yet, we are actively working on it. Until then, I mean, if you're listening to this, that means you must have found us somewhere. So hopefully it pops up in Apple sooner than later. Again, I've got some tickets submitted with Apple right now to try to get that fixed. All right, feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing related content, sell what we believe to be some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120 volt 5-gallon system medium, or something bigger like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon unit, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener Jimmy B wrote in with a thought on the costs associated with homebrewing, something we discussed in a recent episode. Jimmy said, "You guys talked about the cost of homebrewing, and I think it can actually save money. Now, as the guy who barely graduated high school, I ain't too good with numbers, but think I'm close. Homebrewing can save you money. I'm in Minnesota, and at my local brewery, a beer costs $8, which with a 20% tip is around $10 per drink. With flash brewing, you can get a kit, a keg, and a picnic tap for around $175, plus about $60-ish for a used CO2 tank and a regulator, putting you at $235 or so. Divided by 10, which is the cost of that local pint, that's just 24 beers. Even your first time, you should get at least 30 pints out of a keg, and if you add another kit on for $50, that'll bring it down to $4 a pint. You would need sanitizer if it doesn't come with the kit, but this is definitely approachable for new brewers and skips bottling, which makes a lot of people quit. More Beer could have a kit that includes all of that, then market how it's cheaper than going out, which would be a gateway to get to all grain, just like Extract was for most of us. This could help the hobby get popular again, or maybe not. Who knows? What do you think, Jordan?
I don't think that the current American homebrewing culture is really around cost savings at this point. We've heard stories from Australia that being a big driver of that, and honestly, beer isn't that expensive. It's a commodity, right? And I think that a lot of people that get into homebrewing are kind of on the more affluent side, and it just hasn't really been a hobby that's cultured around penny pinching, at least in 2025. I think it was a little bit more about that back in the day. So I think that, yes, it absolutely is cost savings, but I'm not convinced that's the driving motivation for most American homebrewers. And I'm curious, Marshall, do we collect income data in the national or the homebrew survey that we do?
We absolutely do, yeah. And it's wild how much homebrewers make. I mean, compared to the, what I would imagine is the average, American at least, homebrewers are bringing in a good amount of money. And I don't disagree with you. I feel like we're kind of starting off our hot takes, with our feedback on this one, because I actually agree with Jimmy. It sounds like you agree as well that homebrewing can actually be less expensive than drinking out. I mean,
absolutely.
Yes.
No question.
But the thing is, that at least 10 years ago, people used to joke about how you get into homebrewing to save money on beer, but you end up blowing all this money on gear, and I think that's true as well. But that's part of the reason I often say that hobbies are for blowing money, careers are for making it, and if you wanted to get into brewing just to save, I agree with you, Jordan, that I don't think most people get into hobbies in general to save money. I don't think that's the driving motivator, but as a gateway, I don't know. I think Jimmy might be onto something. The thing is there are a lot of kits out there that are designed to be very inexpensive as for somebody starting out. So I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a real need out there right now, but maybe, like I said, maybe Jimmy is talking about something that I'm missing here. I built my brother-in-law a system a few years ago that cost about $200 all in. It was a 2.5 gallon brew in a bag, which again, you mentioned Australia. That's where that stems from. In a 4-gallon stainless kettle that we got for like $20 at the grocery store. I mean, he was fermenting in small paint buckets, that had never been used for paint, of course. And his beers turned out great. He was bottle conditioning at the time, but I don't think the biggest driver, or a better way to put it, maybe, Jordan, is that I don't think what's keeping people out of homebrewing is the cost necessarily. I think there's other factors, and it would be it behooves us to consider what those other factors are, outside of money. I don't know. That's my thought. Do you have any other final thoughts on that?
I will say I do agree. Homebrewing is absolutely cheaper than a pint out, and definitely can even reach cost parity, or it can be more affordable than purchasing a 6-pack at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Beer is more expensive when you get it in public, and you're not tipping yourself when you're having a pint at your house. With grains, if you get a whole bag, you can make a really great keg of lager for like $15-20, especially if you're reusing yeast. So you can make really affordable beer. IPA is or maybe like big imperial stout or something. Those do cost a lot more money to make on the homebrew scale relative to more, simpler things that don't have as many hops or malt for that matter. But yeah, there's definitely cost savings to be had. But I just don't think that is like the gatekeeping for the hobby.
Yeah. I think that's where I'm going to wrap that up as well. Is that ultimately you can save money. There is some upfront costs associated with homebrewing. We're all aware of that. You got to get the proper gear to do it right. But in the end, you are saving money per pint. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. So we'll appreciate your feedback, Jimmy. And if you come up with something really cool to get more people in, let us know. We'll promote it for you. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Well, the gift giving holidays are upon us. And who doesn't want some Brülosophy merch in their stocking or wrapped in a gift box under the tree or whatever you do for gift giving on the holidays? We're offering everything from t-shirts and hoodies to hats, fanny packs, phone cases, and so much more in the new Brülosophy shop. You can check out all of our goodies by heading to brulosophy.com/shop. That's /SHOP. And then just clicking one of the product images, it's going to take you to our Dashery store. Or you can just go straight to our Dashery store at brulosophy.dashery.com. Huge thanks to all of those who have already made purchases of our merch. I'm surprised with how many people out there are buying our stuff. And again, classic designs. You've seen all of our logos for everything. We've got it all up there. Go have a look and pick yourself up something to wear around town. We'll be right back with some homebrew hot takes.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
Life doesn't pause when you're sick. Vaccines against respiratory illnesses can help protect you and give you more playtime with your best friend. Depending on age and health status, vaccinations for flu, COVID-19, RSV, or pneumococcal infection may be recommended. Vaccines can help keep you from having a rough time. Learn more at cveep.org/vaccines-protect. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and CVEEP, fighting infectious respiratory disease.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. It was only when you proposed the idea for this episode to me, Jordan, that I realized I wasn't terribly confident in my interpretation of what exactly a hot take was. So I hit Google's AI, who spit out this definition. A hot take is a quickly produced, strongly worded, and often deliberately provocative or sensational opinion, typically presented with little to no original research or evidence. Now, obviously, our patrons are intelligent people who make thoughtful decisions, so we're going with a looser definition of a hot take as just being an opinion that may not be widely accepted. Is that fair, Jordan?
Yeah, I think it's an unpopular opinion, basically.
Yeah. So, and in the context of homebrewing, it's basically, some approach somebody might take that might get scoffed at by traditionalists or something like that. So we're going to have some fun with this one. Again, just to clarify, all of the hot takes that we're going to read throughout the episode were submitted by Patrons of Brülosophy. These are those folks who give us a small amount of money every month to become a patron of ours to support what we're doing. And this is another benefit they get for doing that. And so we're going to comment on these hot takes and during which I imagine we're going to share some of our own as well. So this should be fun. This one, the first hot take was submitted by somebody named Vinny from New York. And he says, "What's up with breweries serving objectively flawed beer? By no means am I judging anyone who works at a brewery. I don't work at one, and I can't imagine how difficult it could be to succeed in the beer industry. But I think all of us homebrewers can tell the difference between a beer we don't like because of preference and a beer that no one should like because of process issues. I almost feel insulted sometimes because it seems like whoever's responsible for the beer thinks their customers won't notice that something is wrong with it. Is it a sign that the brewery is suffering some sort of hardship? The decision to dump hundreds of gallons of beer could be a financial nightmare. So packaging and serving it is the only option. Or could it be an experience mixed with a passion for brewing and the eagerness to get that beer to the people? Or could it simply be complacency and the loss of that passion and eagerness?"
Okay. I agree with this so much. And I think I'm in a particularly relevant position to talk about it because I travel a lot. I'm over 30 days in a hotel at this point this year. I've been to 49 of the 50 U.S. states. I've been to almost every major city. I'm always on the run. And when I do, I love to go beer hunting and try to find great craft beer. And, if I'm in a city with a recognizable, craft brewery that I've heard about through the kind of the scene, I am always eager to go check it out. But then there's other times that I'm in a place that there's just nothing I've really heard about. And I'm just kind of seeing what's up and just trying a rando place. And what I've found is that bad beer is everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yes, it's everywhere.
And unfortunately, it seems to be more common in more suburban areas. Now, that is not to say that suburbanites cannot make good beer. Case in point, Goldfinger in the suburbs of Chicago. It's like 45 minutes an hour west, and dear God, it is seriously maybe the best craft lager I've ever had. That's in the suburbs, right? And so it's clearly, it can be done, but something about being in the suburbs where there's not as much craft beer brewery options, maybe the fanfare isn't as strong as in urban cores and cities. I think that these breweries that are there's a couple things going on. One, I think that the craft beer palette isn't as intense maybe in some more suburban and rural areas in terms of like proportion of people that like are BJCP nerds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or even, somewhere in that realm of the, the spectrum. And so I think you can get away with more. Two, if there is not as much competition, you can get away with, lower quality because people still want beer and, you can just have a little bit more wiggle room there. Additionally, I think that, in these, part of it comes down to the brewer, and you also have brewers that just don't know good beer that well, and they themselves think that their beer is great, and they don't, really somehow have a business that's selling beer, and yet they're like diacetyl blind or think that butter tastes good, and so I think that you have this kind of like coalescence of like market forces that aren't as extreme as the highly competitive urban craft beer market of major cities with brewers that don't really know as much about what good beer is and a clientele that's a little bit more laissez-faire about it. And so that's what I've seen, is that if I'm in a suburban area for work and I go into a rando tiny microbrewery, it typically sucks. Now, there is bad beer in cities too. Do not get me wrong. And again, there's great beer in suburban and rural areas, and plenty of examples out there that are like amazing destination experiences. But something about these kind of like more sparsely populated craft beer scenes, it just oftentimes leaves a lot to be desired.
Well, I think, and I don't want to be too presumptuous here, but I think a part of that could just be a function of, you've got these people who get beer at their local store in rural areas or places where there might not be a lot of craft beer out there. And so the beer, I had this conversation with a buddy many years ago about this, that, they get a 12 pack of Green Label of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, and they're drinking it saying, wow, this is so different than Bud Light. This is amazing. I want to brew this beer. Well, unbeknownst to them, that Sierra Nevada, as incredibly well packaged as it is, might have been sitting around for 10 or 12 months, and this little shop that or rural shop that they're going to buy that beer isn't going to swap it out. They're going to sell it, and so to them, that first experience, which we all, I think, value, it's what got us into this thing anyways, is with a beer that might be have too much age on it. And so I often wonder, like, to what extent does that influence these breweries? I think the biggest issue, and this is I'm gonna give a hot take within Vinny's hot take here. I think the bigger issue there's like three things that come to mind. So the first one is, like you said, the brewer is going to define a lot about how the beer that gets served at their brewery, how the quality of it. And I say the brewer because a lot of breweries are not owned by the brewer. Now some are, I get that. But that brewer can go and advocate to the owners and say, hey, look, this is a shitty, a batch of beer. We cannot sell this. We do not want to represent ourselves this way. I think that takes a lot of courage. Sounds like a little bit too extreme, but you have to be willing to dump money down the drain. Literally is what you're doing, for the sake of quality beer. And I think that can be very tough to swallow for people who aren't making that much money as it is. They just have to kind of get rid of this beer. And hey, if people don't notice it, well, we do notice it, right? I think the other issue, though, is that you had, and this is going to be kind of twofold, is that you had a lot of inexperienced homebrewers who just thought, hey, and I don't really have a job right now, maybe I'll start a brewery, go out and do just that. And that, their commercial beer was just as shitty, if not worse, as their homebrew. And I'm not trying to bash anybody here. I know a lot of homebrewers who went pro who are still brewing and they did it right and they're making quality beer. But if somebody's making 5 batches in their garage and then mom and dad pay for a brewery for them, you know what I'm saying? I wouldn't expect it to be very high quality anyways. And as horrible as it sounds, the best thing or the best option that we have as consumers for breweries like that are reviews, and I don't, that's what they read those reviews. Some of them live and die by those reviews. So I just think a part of it has to do with as when homebrewing was just skyrocketing in popularity, you saw a lot of people jumping over to the professional world. And I think what we saw was, an increase in the total amount of crappy breweries out there, and also in some good ones. And so, the ones that aren't staying around, sadly, are probably ones that weren't necessarily producing the best quality beer anyway. Now, that's not universal. I get that. But, that's, I don't know. To me, it's multifaceted issue, but no brewery should be serving beer that tastes that bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is multifaceted. I think, like you said, it's a mix of incompetency or lack of, care at the brewer's level, and then a market saturation level, which allows that to continue to exist or thrive. You just cannot compete in a really competitive craft beer market like Los Angeles or something like that with crappy beer. It's not possible. But in areas that there's not as many options, you might be able to get away with it. And it's just a shame that because that brings craft beer, reputations down for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not going to name names. I have nothing but love for local brewers where I live, all that stuff. But there was a brewery in town that Their recipes were great. I knew the brewer. He'd send me recipes. I'd consult with him on this and just for fun. And yeah, the recipes were money. I didn't understand why every batch of beer they made had this horrible off flavor to it. It didn't matter what the style, like if you had an imperial stout, you could kind of get past this just nasty off flavor. Come to find out, they weren't treating their water with anything, and where their brewery was, it was, I mean, they were running it through a filter, but it was not enough. We've all been to breweries like that, and thankfully the brewery that's in that spot now is treating their water, and the beers are phenomenal. They're just killing it. So shout out to Burning Sun Brewery. We're gonna have the guys from Burning Sun on an experience episode here in the future, but killing it right now. So
before we move on, I have one little anecdote. I don't think I've ever shared this on air. So years ago, I brewed a beer for a friend's wedding, and there was a guest at the wedding who owned a bar, a really great dive bar in Portland. And he approached me and he's like, "I cannot believe you brewed this at home." And this would have been 12, 13 years ago. So I was like a newer home brewer, and I made this like Hefeweizen and this passion fruit sour, something that really blew him away, I guess. And which is funny looking back. I'm sure my beers are a lot better now. But nonetheless, he was like, "I want you to brew beer for my bar." And I was like, that's not really how this works. I'm like a little home brewer that makes these like tiny little batches. And this guy badgered me for a couple years. And so eventually I like started asking around town, and I found a small microbrewery that was going to let me gypsy brew on their system. And the deal that we worked out was they would just pay me under the table, X% per keg. And I would develop the recipes and do the baseline batch, and then they would, contract brew them for me. And they had distribution, self-distribution, everything that's allowed here. And they would brew my recipes and distribute it to their bar. And that was kind of their model, as they were like this little micro gypsy brewer thing. And so we went to brew the inaugural batch, and dude, this place was a shit show. Like the people that worked there, there was like this father and son owner, and they were more interested in like getting stoned and getting drunk than actually working. And that is not a good sign. And so when we're like brewing the beer, I'm like, oh, well, let's check that OG. He's like, "Oh, we don't take gravity measurements."
Oh God.
Or, like I was making a Belgian blonde and I was like trying to use Sots hops. He's like, "Oh, well, we'll just use Magnum because that's cheaper." Or, this is the pitch rate we need. We'll use less because, and then like the FG, oh, we don't take FG. Well, it's supposed to be highly carbed. Oh, well, we don't do that. We just carb them all to 2.4 or whatever. And so it was, like literally when he would like, turn the corner, I'd go and grab another thing of yeast and add it and stuff like that. I'm like doing everything I can like on the fly to like try to like make this a better beer.
Right.
And this guy, they just cut all the corners to save money. And he was a brewer owner, and it wasn't his beer. He was gypsy brewing or contract brewing. And when it came time to taste the beer that was supposed to be a flagship beer for a wonderful dive bar in Portland, he goes, "What do you mean taste it? It's in a keg."
Oh my God.
And I was like, but dude, this is supposed to be a huge financial boon for you. This like steady stream of your own flagship beers in a very popular bar. This bar wanted to sell a ton of this stuff regularly. Is like their flagship offerings. And he's like, "Well, if you want to try it, go to the bar and go try it yourself. We can't tap this keg." And so like they just had absolutely zero interest in trying.
Yikes.
And so it's like what are the odds they're not around anymore?
Yeah, go figure.
And so there are places like that out there. And so it's just a shame because, you and me, we care so much about making exceptional beer, and the fact that people are trying to sell stuff that they don't even care about, it's sad.
Yeah, I agree. And on that, Vinny, thank you for the first hot take. We've already spent way more time than we typically do on just your one, and we've got so many more to go through. So this is going to be fun. The next one comes from James Splinter, who says, "My hot take is learning and evolving. Don't get stuck in your ways or you'll never make better beer. For example, I've tried the crank and shake method a couple of times. That is a method for carbonating beer in a keg. One time while dry hopping in the keg, the hops were placed in a muslin bag. Then the keg was placed on its side side while I pressurized it and rolled it gently on the ground. The carbonation came out perfect. However, the muslin bag opened up and spilled its contents into the keg. Even though I never got a clogged post, I got hot matter in every glass of beer. I named that beer the Salad. I have now evolved to the burst carbonation method and haven't had many issues since. However, I still do bottle conditioning every now and then. If you keep up to date with different brewing processes, then you'll have something on to fall back on when something in your process fails. I like what James is saying here, and he uses a couple fairly simple examples, but I think the broader, point that he's trying to make is don't be so closed-minded when you're approaching beer, particularly if what you're looking for is improvement. Be open to maybe doing some things that even, the person who got you into brewing might have said you should never do, because it might actually improve your beer.
I really agree. I'm not sure how much of a hot take this is. I don't know if this is that unpopular of an opinion, though.
Yeah,
at least
you're right.
on the homebrewing scale. But I've heard of some professional breweries who are like, that's the brewery way. And like new employees are like trying to innovate and like help them improve. They're like, well, we've always done it this way, so we can't change our COP.
Yeah.
And I think that, or SOP, I think that this is a really important thing for all brewers, big and small.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the bigger thing here, not really a hot take. You and I are probably going to perceive some of what's said by our patrons as not being as hot as maybe the general public general brewing public might take it, because we have been so steeped in Brülosophy, which we'd be silly to pretend that people don't view us as kind of like the model of hot takes. We test it out. So, no, we're not bashing anybody for their hot takes, but appreciate yours, James. Scott says, I found fermentation temperature is not so crucial. The beer might end up different at drastically different temps, but usually it's still good. It's fun to play with warmer temps. You could try Kvike, Saison, 3470. If you're unsure of a specific yeast, usually a few degrees colder or warmer than the listed optimal range is fine. I'm also not hung up on repeatability. Go bonkers the first time. Worry about consistency later if you're trying to dial in a specific beer. A mostly consistent process will help with predictability. Styles are guidelines for competitions and help inform expectations for the drinker, but maybe a, quote, strong hoppy lager is your best beer and sufficient to get your point across. Just have fun.
Okay, I do think this is a hot take, maybe pun intended, that fermentation temperature is something that we have often been very dogmatic about in this industry and in this hobby. And, credit to Brülosophy, I think the doors are really open on that. And, I hate to say it, but I'm a bit of a believer. I've definitely done my fair share of warmer 3470 ferments, and it makes a pretty damn clean lager-like beer.
Yeah.
I will contend that I think that a 46 degree Fahrenheit ferment, contains more sulfur and some other things like, maybe a softer profile, less attenuation than a 66 degree ferment might get. But these are, kind of on the margins, and you can make a great beer fermented warm. So yeah, it's really incredible how much of an impact, this conversation has had. Now, even, Lallemand, I think, is advertising that you can go ahead and ferment this stuff warm.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. I've told you before, Jordan, that I've heard from several breweries, many well-known, who have just reached out to say, hey, we tried it on a batch of our, house, Pilsner or whatever, and it worked out great. And I'm like, yeah, that's how our experience has been as well. Not nearly the boogeyman that we all thought it was, warmer fermentation temperatures for lagers in particular. I will say, again, my hot take within Scott's hot take here, I am not sad that Kvike isn't talked about nearly as much as it was a few years ago. That's not to say that I'm a hater. I've actually been proven wrong about my opinions on Kvike with hoppy beers, but I have yet to have a Kvike fermented lager or lager, adjacent style, I guess, that I thought tasted as good, if not, or better than a beer fermented with lager yeast. And I say that as somebody who ferments lagers at 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19C. So that's one of them. I don't know, everybody, it seemed like, because Kvike is this yeast strain that hit the market being talked about as being fermented warm, it like gave them permission to do it and to not shit on it. But when we talk about using 3470 warm or global or, the Weihenstephan lager strain, oh my God, it was like we were, blaspheming the brewing community. And that just wasn't the case. Right. So I guess part of it, of my opinion, was wrapped up in that. But again, to kind of go along more with what Scott was saying, even the yeast strains that we have tested, lager yeast strains, and I feel like when we talk about firm temp now, I kind of automatically defer to lagers. So, but those yeast strains that have produced significant results consistently, like one of them is Harvest. I've noted as being my favorite lager yeast strain. It's the Augustiner strain. That one did come back significant. But when we asked people after the fact which one tasted more lager-like, the warm fermented one is what the majority of people said, and so it's just interesting to me when we really start to break it down and look at, well, what is a lager? Is a lager defined by the yeast that's used or by the fermentation temperature? Is it the grain? To me, it's the gestalt, and none of those things on their own are the sole definition of a lager. You know what I mean? So that, I don't know, that's where I'm at with it. I feel like the fermentation temperature within Brülosophy circles, fermenting a lager warm is definitely not a hot take, but as soon as you step outside of that, I imagine it still is. Yeah.
I have a bit of conspiracy theory here. So as someone that's been to a bazillion homebrew meetings and had, my fair share of poorly fermented or poorly executed lagers, I think that making a traditional lager with traditional cold fermentation is not as easy as pitching a single pack of Imperial Global at 66F and letting it rip.
Yeah.
I think that oxygen, yeast nutrient, yeast health, pitch rates, etc., start to matter more when you're fermenting below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I think that fermenting warm is a bit of a cheat code. And if you don't have the skills or the desire to go the extra effort with these, traditional ferments and, beer executions, then, you're probably better off pitching warm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if you love lager beer and you've been afraid to make one because you just can't make it because you don't have the gear to do it, just ferment it like you do an ale and see what you think. I mean, it's $35 at worst, because you're using 11 pounds of grain, a very small amount of hops and some lager yeast. I mean, I just give it a go. I think maybe the most hot part, or the hottest take that Scott said was his note to have fun. I think a lot of brewers forget that piece of it sometimes, and they delve, and maybe that's part of the hobby that they enjoy, is just geeking out so much that it actually becomes a stressor. If you're not having fun, it's probably not a good hobby for you to be in. So, hey, have some fun. All right, next hot take comes from Arvid Lindmark. He actually has two hot takes. One of them is very similar to what another person, Tom Court, said, so I'm going to include these two together. So the first one, most home and craft brewers can't tell the difference between complexity and messy. Whoo-hoo, this is a hot one. Adding a 5th malt and 7th hop variety probably won't improve your beer, but just make it confusing. On the same note, messing around with sub 5% additions of pretty neutral malts like Vienna and Munich is essentially pointless. If you want a perceptible impact, you're gonna have to treat it like you're gonna need to treat it like the base malt it is. Now, Tom Court, just to roll off of Arvid's comment here, says homebrewers should spend less time trying to make beer into something specific and let the ingredients do the talking. Add too many colors together and you get brown. Focus on simpler recipes and you might like what you find and can then later identify that in other beers until an experiment shows it's not statistically significant.
Okay, this really resonates with me because I'm a very simple brewer. I think you can make incredible beers with basically just one hop, one malt, one yeast, right?
Yeah.
This is a classic homebrewer kind of approach where you're just over-engineering the hell out of these things, and whether or not it's actually getting you anywhere at all, let alone anywhere farther, I question that. So we have a club member in our club, and I don't know that he listens, but we love you, Paul. But this guy, his beers are hilarious, and it's so fun trying them because I kid you not, 20 ingredients minimum in every beer.
What?
And yes, and he really prides himself on having these ridiculously long ingredient lists, and he reads them out to us like when he introduces a beer, and it's like 10 grains, 5 hops, 4 yeasts, and then like 15 adjuncts, like, a single daisy from my yard and a sprig of lavender and a squirt of lemon juice. But the funny thing is, a lot of them are pretty good, but it's this like really wacky farmhousey brewing. And he just really gets off on how many ingredients can he cram into a given beer. And it's really and I'm the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm like, yep, it's just check hops and check yeast and check malt.
I want Paul to send me like 10 of his beers, and I'll do a whole episode tasting those with my friends. That just sounds fun. But I completely agree with you and Arvid, it sounds like, as well as Tom, that simplicity is really where let me put it this way. Arvid calls it complexity and messy, right? And I would say that it doesn't always come out messy. Sometimes you can brew a beautiful beer that has 20 ingredients in it. I'm just not convinced those ingredients made any difference. Here's a little anecdote for you. Back about 15 years ago or so, it was before Brülosophy got started, my friend Chris and I had developed this recipe. It's a pale ale called Smiling Sky Pale Ale that we made. The very first iteration of it had like 7 grains in it, and we're talking like 2 ounces of honey malt, half a pound of Vienna malt. We had 2 different pale malts, and we made this beer. The bittering, the initial bittering edition was at 42 minutes, not at the start of the boil. It was just a weird recipe, but we loved it. We brewed it a few times. And then I remember Chris and I used to carpool together to work, and he's kind of talking about what we're going to brew next. And we're going to brew Smiling Sky the coming up, the weekend that was coming up. And we're going over the recipe, and he's like, do you really think all this stuff matters? I'm like, that's a good question, man. I don't know. And he's like, how about this? He's like, during our off time today at work, let's see if we can't just really simplify this recipe and see how it turns out. See if we like it, the same way or as much as we like the original. Lo and behold, we got it down to like 3 basic grains. It was like pale malt, I think some Vienna malt, and maybe some crystal malt or something like that. We moved the hopping around to make it easier, less. We didn't have to focus on it. The beer turned out equally as delicious, and that's the point I'm trying to make is even if it doesn't result in a bad beer or a messy brown beer type of deal, it could also be that you're just not noticing it, that it's having very, very little impact anyways. Like Arvid said, sub 5% additions of neutral malts like Vienna and Munich. That I'm 100% on board with that. There's something nuanced about simplicity in brewing, and I like that. I like being able to know, man, that flavor that I'm getting is almost certainly because of that single malt that I used in this beer, because I didn't include a bazillion other little things in there. So that's my thoughts on that one. And I agree with Tom and Arvid wholly on these ones, but I know a lot of people out there. I still get recipes sent to me to review, from homebrewers. And my God, the number one thing I tell them is you just pare this thing down a little bit. You don't need as much stuff in there. So Arvid's second hot take, he says, of course, beer flavor is determined by OG much more than FG. Mash temperature can be used to control alcohol without impacting overall perception. As long as your fermentation is healthy and your mash bill is reasonable, a beer that has a higher FG than intended won't be sweet or heavy, etc. And a lower FG won't mean thin, boozy, or anything of the sort. I feel like we were just recently talking about this on the show, but kind of a general homebrewing hot take, I would say, but within Brülosophy circles, maybe not so hot.
Well, we get the opportunity to really test these things, and I'll have higher FGs than I thought, or especially if we're testing something that would impact that. And then even cited, you'll be like, wow, that doesn't taste as sweet like I thought it would be. I'm looking at this number, but it tastes fine. And so I think that we've learned both through triangle tests, which have demonstrated that people cannot reliably distinguish beers that have higher FG, and also just tasting them side by side and knowing what it is, it really isn't that impactful, at least on the margins that we're dealing with. I think that if you have a beer that doesn't ferment out, it's going to be sweet, if it's like, oh gosh, the yeast didn't take off. But barring something major like that, it tends to be not overly thin or boozy or anything of the sort.
Yeah, probably, outside of lager fermentation temperature, I would say that the mash temperature experiments were, especially the first time I did it, where I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Why is this high FG, blonde ale that I made right next to a cooler mashed, version that's way lower, higher alcohol even? Why do these taste identical? It's very, very interesting. I've said many times before, I'm wholly convinced that these long chain dextrins that stay in the beer when you mash warmer just aren't perceptibly sweet, even though they are sugars. I just think our tongues don't perceive them the same way they do, table sugar or whatever. I mean, if you were to go, I forget what the ratio is, Jordan, but I know, if you wanted to use something like corn sugar in your coffee or something, right? You like your coffee sweet. You have to use something like 4 times or 5 times as much as you would table sugar. So, different sugars are perceived at with different levels of sweetness. And it just seems it just happens to be that these long chain dextrins that remain in beer, when you mash warm aren't perceptibly sweet. And I think that's fascinating. So, all right. Final hot take for this segment comes from Justin Gerharder, who says, going grain to glass in 7 days isn't the flex you think it is. Give the yeast time to work. It's magic. How hot is that take? Jordan, what do you think?
Amen, brother. I'm exactly with Justin on this one. And it's funny, I mentioned in a previous episode that I had kind of struggle with attenuation in my home brewery. I kind of struggle with fermentation time too. My friends are always like, oh yeah, this cold lager fermentation is ripping and is done in 6 days. It takes me 2 weeks. And so I don't know why time slows down in this basement, but this is something that I've just learned to accept, and it will be ready when it's ready.
So that's where I was going to go is I don't know that I've ever felt like I was flexing, which I take that to mean like showing off, right? Is that okay? Yeah. So that I was like bragging about the fact that I could turn a beer around in 7 days. I do think it's fun to play around with stuff like that just to see what you can get away with. But I am absolutely in the camp of let the beer tell you when it's ready to go onto packaging. You know what I mean? If I hit FG, if I'm at my target FG, but I still detect, some diacetyl in a beer when I take a FG sample, I'm not going to package it yet. I'm going to let it sit there. I might warm it up a little bit. That's the beauty of having the gear that allows you that level of control. But that beer will let you know when it's done. You've got to interact with it. You got to taste it. You got to test it, do all that stuff. But turning it around fast just for the sake of impatience, I think I agree with Justin on that. I'm not sure how. I'd be curious what other people think about that. Like, are people out there flexing because they're making beers fast in a week or whatever? I don't know. I don't really see that. At least
there is one place you see it.
Where?
And it's kind of not as popular anymore. Kveik. When that stuff came out, people were like, dude, I'm drinking a beer that I brewed yesterday. And it's like, that looks like a glass of milk. This is disgusting.
Gross. Maybe that's part of what influenced my less than positive perception of Kveik overall. I don't know. But yeah, I agree with you, Justin, that let the beer tell you when it's done and move on from there. So, well, we've got to get to a quick break. We'll be right back with more hot takes.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brülosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to Xchillerator.com today.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Alrighty, the next hot take comes from patron Mark Wagner, who says, I've avoided expensive equipment and use Monster fermenters, which are made from PET, oxygen penetration, to transfer to the keg. I first purge the keg by pushing sanitizer out with CO2 and then using an unobstructed liquid out disconnect to my serving keg, gravity feed the beer in from the fermenter with the airlock removed. More oxygen exposure. While this is a slow process, in about 20 minutes, the keg is full. The taste of fresh beer, IPAs and Pilsners alike, he says, lasts for months. I do add a small amount of SMB. Beers I've made with this method have won 2 first places in local competitions. There are oxygen vectors that are brutal and those that are not. Can we stop splitting hairs on the small stuff? I'd like to remove high cost as a vector driving people out of homebrewing. There it is again, that high cost being a motivator for people getting into homebrewing. What do you say about this one?
I think there's a couple things here. One, I'm a huge fan of using simple equipment. One of my hot takes is these, $500 stainless steel fermenters are overkill for the homebrew level. They certainly work, but it's just so many parts to clean.
Yeah. When
you can just ferment in a corny keg in a, $50 chest freezer off of Craigslist. And it's just so much easier. But, people want to over-engineer stuff, and if you get off on, scrubbing down 400 parts, I guess be my guest. But I do not get it, and you can make incredible homebrewed beer with really simple equipment. But on the oxygen exposure part, I've a little preview here. I've got a experiment that's going to come out in the next few months that kind of tests something like that. And it was pretty eye-opening for me, but I do think that we want to try to mitigate our oxygen exposure on the cold side. And what's kind of confusing to this comment to me is like, well, if you're using CO2 to push sanitizer around, why not just use CO2 to push the beer into the receiving keg? Sounds like it'd be quicker and you already have the equipment to do it. But I think that if you're going to have oxygen exposure, I like this idea of a little bit of SMB as a prophylactic. And I think that, let's try to mitigate oxygen exposure, but, there are workarounds. And if you don't mind, if you're not detecting any oxidation in your beers, let alone your winning medals, all the best to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know it. So in the time that I've been doing Brülosophy, my opinions on certain methods, gear, all of that have naturally shifted. Some just based on, time and age and all of that stuff, but also a lot of it influenced by the stuff that we do here at Brülosophy, the experiments and whatnot. I used to not have any concerns about cold side oxidation, and now it is probably my number one, what I believe is the number one culprit for bad beer is oxygen exposure. And I think a lot of the impact of oxygen exposure can go undetected as such, if that makes sense. Just meaning that you might taste a beer and be like, it's just not that good. And it may very well be that it's oxidized, and we just don't pick it up because a lot of people associate oxidation with wet cardboard, which is weird because I've never eaten wet cardboard before. So to me, going a little overboard to ensure that you don't expose your beer to oxygen, like I'm fully okay with that. I'm to the point now where I'm everything is as closed as it can be on my transfers on the cold side. I'm not using SMB as often because I'm very confident in my approach and my methods to keep oxygen out. But Mark, you're saying that you use SMB, and that is a prophylactic. I mean, that we have shown over and over and over again that sodium metabisulfite as well as potassium metabisulfite does. I mean, it's magical when it comes to scrubbing beer of oxygen. And so if you're adding that, then yeah, I agree. You don't need to sweat the small stuff because you're using a product that absolutely, reduces the oxygen that might have been exposed to your beer. So more power to you. If it's working for you, you're winning awards, good job. But for those people out there who are struggling to make a good beer, consider employing even some seemingly, innocuous or even meaningless methods for reducing cold side oxidation, and maybe it will have an impact. I mean, that is just one of those things. Don't oxidize your beer. It's awful. So, all right, next hot take comes from Chris G, who says, while consumption is down in general, gatekeeping is what pushed craft beer and homebrewing down faster. Oh boy. Too many times I've been at a brewery with my wife where the beer tender is shocked when she orders something other than a light beer. She's an award-winning homebrewer who had a pro-am at GABF, and in a lot of cases, she knows more than the guy behind the bar. We ask why craft beer is white and male, and this is part of the answer. The old guard is also holding us back. I got my first kid at 21 over 20 years ago, and I change my approach all the time, partly due to you guys, to us, I guess. But I see people all the time that think if you don't brew like a pro, then you're making crap. It's hard to get into a hobby when the people with knowledge are telling you it is their way or the highway. This is a pretty hot take, I would say.
There's a lot going on in here. I would say that I think that there is probably undoubtedly some sexism in craft beer and brewing, just like everything else in this fucking world. But I will say that, I don't think that you would get the same level of reaction in certain parts of the country. Not that sexism isn't happening behind the scenes, but like in super advanced craft beer markets, Los Angeles, Denver, Portland, Seattle, you name it, people aren't going to question the style that they're ordering based on their gender. But I would say in places where it's not as advanced and like macro beer is kind of the cultural standard, this doesn't really surprise me. So I'd be interested to hear where this person lives and where this is happening. But whenever I'm at a craft brewery, I assume that the beer tender knows nothing and have absolutely no faith in their ability. I was recently at a fantastic craft brewery in Portland, and I was very surprised when I was talking to the bartender. She looked, 12. I was like, what do you think between the new Czech Dark Lager and the new Helles? What do you think is, what should I go for? And she goes, I'd say the lager. And I was like, the Czech Dark Lager? And she goes, yeah. And I was like, okay, great. And she goes, would you like a lime with that?
Oh.
And I was like, no, thanks. And she goes, oh gosh, I don't think we have limes. And then this more adult person comes over and is like, okay, so this is the sanitizer, and this is how I was like, it was her first day. And had clearly knew nothing about craft beer. And I wasn't mad. And my friend's a brewer there, and I chuckled up with him about how I was offered a lime for my Czech Dark Lager by this 21-year-old and 1-day-old person that just got hired there. And it's that's my hot take is I really think that we should have better staff behind the bar at craft breweries that really understand the styles and that are, kind and considerate and aren't judging people based on their looks or appearance or, orientation based on what they think they should like and what they think they might know. I think that there's a lot of work that could be done behind the bar, but it's just really hard to get people that know and care. They're going to stick around. And so I just have no expectations going in, and don't let the people behind the bar serve as gatekeepers.
Yeah. I fully agree with you. I have absolutely witnessed, I haven't been the victim of it necessarily, but I've witnessed with my own eyes in bars or pubs, breweries, all of the above, what Chris is talking about. And it's an unfortunate thing, but I'm going to turn the tables a little bit as well. There is among brewers, craft beer nerds, our ilk, if you will, there is a level of arrogance that we have to own at times, that we know everything about beer, that we're the smart ones, that I remember, I'm not going to name names, no throwing anybody under the bus here, but maybe some people will recognize this story. I remember hearing somebody talk about how they were at a restaurant one time and the waitress comes over and doing her job says, hey, the person asks what beers are on tap. The waitress tells him and says, and I would recommend, this amber ale because it's got a really nice flavor profile and it's made with hops. Something like that. Very nondescript. As a brewer, we're like, yeah, every beer's made with hops. We know that, right? And this person's response was, listen, I brew, blah, blah, blah. I know what it is. You don't even need to tell me about it. I'll just order what I want. And I thought, man, that's such a dick move to act like that and to go in. And there's something that I find rather endearing about people who obviously don't know as much as we do, when we're going into a brewery or something like that, but they're really working it. They're, doing their best. Not all of us speak the exact same language when it comes to brewing and beer. And so we can have a little bit of grace with these folks. One of the things that I really appreciate are breweries that have programs for their staff, to really learn more about the beers that they're serving, and to be able to speak that language a little bit better. And I think that can be really helpful on a marketing, on a sales from that perspective, because if I go and I ask you a question about a Czech dark lager and you're saying, oh yeah, it's an ale that you can have with lime or something, whatever it is, if you're saying that, I'm automatically, you're losing a little bit of credibility with me. I'm not going to judge you negatively, but if you know at least the basics of the styles that you're serving, I do think there's something really beneficial about that for the consumer as well as the business. But to get back to what Chris was talking about, this whole bias that, in the beer world, the sexism, the racism, it's there. And for us to not call it what it is, I think is stupid. And so I hope that in the future we're able to move past that stuff because I think it's bullshit. So, all right. Eric Webster says, Cara family of malts is overrated, especially Carapils. Every experiment I could find, and he's referring to Brülosophy experiments, showed no perceptible difference, yet so many recipes on the internet include Cara something, purportedly because it makes a difference in the final beer. I am unconvinced and don't see why the effort of inventorying another malt is worth the trouble.
This is really reminiscent of the one we heard earlier, and I agree here as well. I think that there is probably at least one notable exception, Cara Munich.
Ugh.
If you use 10% of that, you are going to know it's in your beer.
Oh,
but yeah, I mean, 1% Carapils and all this stuff, it's like, what are we doing? It's just like, I really think that this is going to be more common in homebrewers that are buying batch to batch, especially if they have a local homebrew store. A little pinch of that, a little pinch of that. But if you're carrying base malts in your home brewery, you don't probably need to have 40 different like Cara whatevers on hand to add, at 1% of the grist. It's just not adding anything. We've tested 20% of the grist on ingredients and we can never tell the difference on it. You think 1% Carapils is going to make a difference?
Well, and, I'm going to ask you, because I know I've been brewing a little bit longer than you, I think, Jordan. What was the primary reason, or what is the primary reason people use Carapils?
Foam retention.
It's foam retention. That's exactly what I was sold on. And I feel like I've been sold a bill of goods. There is beyond just Brülosophy evidence, right? Which if you don't want to call that evidence, fine. There is actual scientific research that shows that Carapils is foam negative, that it actually depletes, it's bad for foam development. And so why we're told that you need to include 5% Carapils if you want to get a real nice rocky, cap of foam, that is just wrong. You don't need Carapils to achieve that at all. It also contributes nothing in the way of flavor, in my opinion, in my experience, at least when used at the recommended rates. It is, I would be, if Carapils went away and we never had access to it again, I don't think anybody would notice. I don't think anybody would taste or see a difference. I don't understand why it's even out there. So Eric, you and I share this hot take because I still see so many recipes online that have 5% Carapils in it. I don't understand why.
It does seem to be dying, though. That was like a requisite, part of the grist 10, 15 years ago, and you do not see that very much. There seems to be a mass exodus towards simplification.
Yeah. And I think Eric is referring to things like Carahel as well. But there are these character malts. I say character malts. He's referring to Cara, like Karastan, and there are some, like you said, Cara Munich, that I don't even like it 2%. I mean, they really do have an impact. I'm not a fan of the impact that they have necessarily. But, so I'm assuming what Eric is referring to here, primarily the low Lovabond, those low color, really pale caramalts that are typically sold as being in some way a contributor to body and foam retention. Nope. Thumbs down on those for me as well. All right. Next hot take comes from Jorn Roan Gard. Who says, I haybox the mash. Now, this is a term that I was unfamiliar with. So he goes, I haybox the mash, meaning that after mashing in, I cut the power, put the lid on, wrap up the kettle in thick blankets, and just leave it sitting there for an hour or more. No heating, no pump, no stirring. The temp drop is negligible, and mash efficiency consistently hits 79%. Totally stress-free, leaving me time to prepare and do a little cleaning, walk the dog, etc. I'm just going to say real quick, this just sounds like the way everybody was brewing like 15 years ago.
I was going to say the same thing. Like, this is a hot take today in 2025. It absolutely is. But in 2015, this is just the standard way of brewing.
Exactly. Everybody was figuring out some way to insulate their mash tun or insulate their kettle, whatever they're using as a mash tun. Nowadays, though, I see where Jorn's coming from. We've got access to these amazing electric brewing systems. And, in order to keep the cost somewhat reasonable, I know they're still fairly expensive. It's not like they're going to great lengths to insulate these kettles and do all that stuff. So, rather than do all that, you're recirculating with a pump and constant heat and all of that. So what Jorn's saying is, I don't do any of that and I'm still making good beer. Yeah, I think it's a hot take in this day and age. Maybe not 15, 20 years ago, but
we are making better beer now than we were 15, 20 years ago. I really do believe that.
Yep.
And along that time frame, we've seen great advancements on the hot side in terms of mashing and boiling equipment, moving to stainless steel and electric, et cetera. That is not what has caused us to make better beer. It is the stuff that we're doing on the cold side, like we talked about earlier, the oxidation mitigation, better quality ferments, better quality yeast. That is what has helped us make better beer. We've just happened to all upgrade our hot side along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks a lot to all these great companies out there producing cool gear. You know what I mean? All right. Taylor Coleman says, most of your favorite small breweries and kitschy beer styles are going to disappear from the commercial space probably soon. Passion isn't going to cut it. Quality beer isn't going to cut it. Margins are thin, and you just cannot survive without a certain size of operation and certain volume product. Ultimately, I think this will be a rising tide for homebrewing. Where else are people going to get their strawberry banana milkshake chocolate porter?
I don't know. I think I might have the opposite conspiracy theory. I could see how small breweries or brewing is basically going to become like local restaurants. And you have these tiny little breweries that make beer for the neighborhood, and it's a small business that's not, making someone hella rich. Whereas it's just serving the community, just like the local Mexican restaurant on the corner. And you see time and time again, big breweries scale up and they go out of business.
Yeah.
And so maybe, small, local, micro businesses that are not making anyone rich are more sustainable, and big brewing, like at the craft scale, is the one that's going to be dying out.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I fall between you and Taylor on this. I absolutely think that nano breweries are designed to fail in the climate that we're in right now. Just meaning that I just don't think it's going to work with what's happening in the world of beer and brewing right now. But I also don't think that there's not a place for smaller local breweries. Maybe that's because we have a few in town still that seem to be succeeding despite the lull in brewing. Do you, in order to make money brewing, do you have to go in with $2 million? I think that's probably the best way to ensure longevity, is if you're going in with good beer, of course, right off the bat, and being able to make enough to serve all of the people that come through your doors. I think that probably is the best way. But again, I've never started a brewery. I have no interest in being a professional brewer at all. And so I can't really speak to that from experience. It's just kind of based on what I think about, the business side of this gig. But yeah, interesting idea. I don't know if, kitschy beer styles are ever going to disappear. I think what's going to happen is they're going to stay in the BJCP guidelines. And like you said, Taylor, us homebrewers are going to be the ones who keep them alive. I mean, we've revived old styles that were, otherwise long gone, right? So that is kind of what homebrewers do for the beer world, and I think it's pretty rad. So,
I mean, the only way you're going to have an amber ale at this point is going to a homebrew club meeting.
Or brewing one yourself. I mean, that's
right.
that's what I would do. I love amber ale steel, and we're lucky because Crow and Wolf, Brad is a lover of great styles that may not even be that popular, and so he is consistently putting cool stuff on tap. They had a Scotch ale, like a 60 shilling or whatever, on tap recently. A nice classic American porter was on tap. Stuff you can't find at most places. Of course, it's in between all of the IPAs and the seltzers and stuff like that as well. But it is nice to have a local where you can go and get some of these more classic, less popular styles of the day. So. All right, Paul Beckers says, I've been brewing for 15 years and still haven't invested in a fermentation temperature control. I'm in the Seattle area for climate reference. Many in the Browns Point Homebrew Club are shocked about this. I've just learned to adjust my yeast selection based on the time of the year. I'm going to go ahead and come in here because I started brewing when I was up in Bellingham, Washington. I mean, pretty much the same climate, arguably a little bit cooler throughout the year than down in Seattle. And I did the same thing for the first, 12 batches that I brewed. I would ferment in a closet. I would I only made ales because back then you only did lagers if you were a millionaire who could afford brewing lagers back then, all the gear that was required. But I never had an issue with fermentation temperature either. And I think in certain climates like the Pacific Northwest, you can easily get away with not paying for a fermentation freezer or glycol.
As a home brewer of almost 15 years in the Pacific Northwest, I also used to do this. I didn't get any sort of fermentation temperature control until maybe 2019 or so. And so I would brew ales in the winter, fermented in a closet at ambient temperatures, using Chico yeast and stuff like that. And then summer meant Saison season. And I would just ferment Saisons, even though, my home wasn't as hot as like Texas or something. It still was hotter than ideal for a, cooler, normal temperature range ale fermentation. So I switched to Saison yeast and enjoyed Belgian summer. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I'm fully on board with that. Funny story. I was thinking about, the people that I first interacted with locally here, where I live in California, in the brewing world and the home brewing side, particularly. And I had this recollection of this guy, Dave, really nice dude. He was actually the IT, like the head of IT at the grad school that I went to here. And he had commented to me about the local homebrew club. I ended up going to a few. And I remember one time he brought a growler, like a full 1 gallon growler, one of the big ones, of this beer that he made, and he's serving it. It was god awful. I mean, I don't think anybody enjoyed it, but he was real proud of it because the entire thing was made in that growler. Like he didn't, and I remember thinking, like, what was it that ultimately inspired me to start Short and Shoddy? I think that was one of those experiences. I think about it all the time. It comes to my mind all the time that, this is somebody who had all of the gear and the ability to brew a regular batch of beer, but he liked to have fun with it and step outside. He didn't ferment it in a fermentation chamber. He just did his thing, and it wasn't that good, but it was still a drinkable beer. And I think, with what Paul's saying about not having fermentation temperature control, you are controlling fermentation temps by making sure that you put your fermenter in a closet that is going to be 66 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, that is still being mindful of it. I doubt, he's taking the fermentation vessel and putting it on his back porch midsummer where it gets 80 degrees, If that's the case, more power to you. But I think it's the thought, it's the intention behind it that matters more than the actual gear and the equipment and the way you approach it. So. All right, final hot take for this episode comes from patron Adam Bradley, who says, I no-chill into a corny keg after the boil or hop stand, sprinkle dry yeast into the wort while transferring it the next day into a glass carboy, and use CO2 at 1 to 2 psi to push the finished beer into a ready, sanitized, purged keg. I eschew fancy equipment and try to keep it simple, son, KISS. Most of those are considered no-no or bad, but I just won another 2 medals last weekend from beers made with these process steps. Hey, congrats, Adam. That's awesome.
Well, I say go one further. Why are you even transferring out of the keg? Mm-hmm. Just sprinkle your dry yeast directly onto there, and then that's one less thing to clean. And I would be surprised that if it made a demonstrable impact on the quality of the beer.
Yeah, that was my comment as well. You could cut one more thing out of this process, which is you don't need to transfer to a serving keg. Just ferment it in a keg and serve from there, right?
Right. Now I think that you've done no chill brewing, right?
I've done it a few times. I was not terribly pleased with the outcome. The times that I did it, I got the same note in those no chill beers. But here's the thing: I've had no chill beers made by other people that I thought were perfectly fine. So again, you do what works. I think for certain styles, you might be able to pick up some. I say might very intentionally here, pick up something in those beers, the more delicate styles in particular, because just of how long that wort is staying warm and what happens with all the hops and the alpha acids that are in that wort, but I've had great beers made using no chill as well.
Yeah, I've never done it other than lambic cool shipping. So I just don't know like what that, off flavor might be. And I don't think we've ever had anyone in our homebrew club that was actively no chilling as well. We have plenty of water out here and but yeah, I've always been interested in it. I've kind of thought about like a no chill sour beer where you could like mash and boil the beer and then go straight into a corny keg and then just wait a little bit and then add Kveik yeast when it's like 100 degrees or whatever and then let it rip. And then you could also add your lacto at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think that this is something I'm like kind of interested in for maybe like the more farmhousey Kveik range, but for basic, lagers or whatever, if this works for your system, it sounds like a lot fewer things to clean than I'm dealing with.
Yeah. I mean, again, if it works for you and you're happy with those beers, even winning an award, that should just serve as validation. But you're not brewing. I mean, some people, I guess, do brew specifically for competition, but most of us are brewing because we like drinking and sharing the beer that we make. And if you like it, who cares what process you're doing? Who cares, what styles you're making or what liberties you're taking when making those style? Do what you like. That's the beauty of hobbies. It's the beauty of beer. It can't hurt anybody. Well, don't overdo it, of course. But now, given how long I've been doing this Brülosophy thing and testing necessary methods, I do feel, I say necessary with air quotes, right? I do feel like some of the hot takes that we discussed in this episode, we already addressed this a little bit earlier, but maybe not too hot to us because we're so steeped in this Brülosophy thing and testing all of this stuff out. But I know that there are a lot of brewers out there who continue to stick to traditional methods. So here's my final hot take. That's great. Do it. If you want to brew traditionally, brew traditionally. If you want to do triple decoctions, you can do sextuple decoctions if you want to. That's great. Do what makes you happy. Make the beer that you enjoy drinking in the way that it brings you the most pleasure. And I think that is the key, is that this is not a job for most of us, at least. I mean, arguably it is for some of us. But have fun doing this thing. Test things out, push the boundaries, or stay right within it. It doesn't matter. Do what you enjoy doing. What else do you have to say, Jordan?
There was a brewery here that sadly closed. It was Lompoc Brewing, one of the classic Portland craft brewers. And the head brewer came and spoke to our homebrew club one time, and he said they have a very simple rule at their brewery. If you're not having fun, you're fucking fired. And I think that homebrewers should take the same attitude. If you're not having fun, why are you doing this? And whether it's nerding out over every single, tri-clamp and yeast cell count, et cetera, to make the best beer possible, or making it as simple as possible where you add sugar and water to a growler, put a cap on it, and then, take a swig of it every day. Whatever's fun for you, that's what matters. And otherwise, this is, what are you doing?
God, man, I wasn't even going to go, any further, but I want to say something. There is an equal number of people who value the simplicity of brewing and, are using plastic buckets and with an old, batch sparge setup made out of a cooler, and they're making excellent beer. And, there's an equal number of those folks who just cannot tolerate that other people like to spend money on gear and want to do semi-pro homebrewing in their garage, as there are those semi-pro homebrewers looking back at these, batch spargers or no spargers or no chillers and judging them for that. Just let them have it. That's what hobbies are for. So I agree. If you're not having fun, that's the issue. If you're being a dick, that's also an issue. So chill out, have fun, raise a pint, always accept one from somebody who brews different than you just because it's the cool thing to do. All right. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Brülosophy Show, over at youtube.com/@TheBrülosophy Show. That's the @ symbol followed by The Brülosophy Show. No umlaut needed. If you're listening to this podcast, we are confident you're going to love the videos Martin's creating over at YouTube as well. And make sure to head to brülosophy.com to stay current on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my aroma. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no